Hey, what's up guys? So for the second time now, I'm going to be doing something that I really don't like doing. I'm now pulling my recommendation for the Escort Redline 360c series detectors, including both the windshield mount version as well as the custom installed version, the Redline CI 360c. The reason that I'm actually doing this, there's a lot more issues that people have been reporting above and beyond just the response time stuff that I've covered in a previous video. It turns out there's a lot of issues with the latest firmware here of these detectors, and it's gone past the point where I feel comfortable actually recommending it, and it's not what I would expect for like a high-end flagship detector here like this. Now in this video I want to go over what a lot of these issues are that people have been reporting, and therefore why I'm pulling my recommendation for the time being, as well as what it would take for me to add it to my list of recommended detectors again. It is something that I'm open to doing, but there are a couple things that I would like to see. And then for you guys who currently own and run one of these Redline series detectors, obviously you guys are going to be concerned with like, hey, you know, I want my detector to be working well. It's an expensive detector, right? So let's go over kind of like future plans for updates. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Escort. I don't speak for them in any way, shape, or form. But I have kind of been talking about this stuff with them behind the scenes to go over what the issues are. And I'm also trying to help them out to get this stuff ultimately resolved. And so in this video, let's go over maybe more information as far as what's going on here with the Redlines and maybe how things are going to be stacking up moving forward. All right, so first things first, the latest update, one of the biggest changes here was actually to help improve the response time of the detector. Escort says that they're working on it. They've released the first of what's going to be a two-part firmware update. There's some improvements with the first round of updates. There's going to be more improvements in the second one. Some people have reported improvements with this latest version. I haven't seen it in my testing. I suppose your mileage may vary, but we'd ultimately have to see what happens in the second round of testing. Now, one of the things that was really concerning for me was there were some guns that started to throw more issues than others, like the Detector Genesis 2 Select guns, for example. They've had a variety of issues with different detectors, especially the Escorts. Now, looking over those test results, I can't help but wonder, like, is there anything weird going on with that specific copy of the Detector Genesis 2? And so for that reason, I've actually been ordering some additional Genesis 2 Selects with more K-band antennas. I've been ordering some additional K-band antennas separate from this that have just started arriving. All this equipment is arriving this week. Some people on the forums are being helpful in actually sending over their copies of their antennas, so we'll get some additional copies of the guns, different additional antennas, and we'll kind of get a better idea as far as what's going on with different copies of these guns. And then there's a lot of other stuff as well above and beyond just the Genesis issues. Like, for example, people have been reporting false alerts on K-band, on Ka-band. There's laser falses, there's pop falses if you turn them on. People have been finding that the ramp up is no longer behaving properly, or the arrows no longer flip and transition properly. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on here that I've been pretty surprised to see. At first I was like, okay, maybe there's something weird going on with my testing, but then in the forums and in the YouTube comments, I mean, there's been a lot of complaints with this latest firmware. So for those of you guys running one of the Redline detectors, if you haven't updated yet, maybe a good idea to stick to the older version of the firmware. If you are running the new version of the firmware, well, unfortunately, Escort doesn't give us the option to downgrade to older versions of the firmwares the way we can do with maybe some of the other brands of detectors. And so for that reason, we're kind of stuck with the current firmware until Escort fully addresses this stuff and releases an update to hopefully fix this stuff and get it all working the way that it really should. And then as far as what Escort is doing on their end, I've been reporting a lot of the issues that you guys have been sharing with me, stuff that's being posted on the forums and whatnot. They're taking a look at all of that. Additionally, they asked to basically take a closer look at some of my radar guns. I'd even offered like, hey, you know, I sent you the Genesis 2 Select. Did you guys see anything funky on your end when you were testing? And in our discussion, they've actually asked if they could see all of my different radar guns. I had kind of like mixed feelings about this, but ultimately what I really want them to do is like, I want this stuff to work properly. And if I can be of help in any way, like the point of my testing is not to make any manufacturer look good or bad. It's just to get a good idea as far as how the stuff performs and hopefully encourage manufacturers to fix some issues as we find them. And if there's something that I can do to maybe help this process in some way, I'm certainly open to doing it if it winds up helping you guys. I kind of hope they're not maybe optimizing for my specific guns, so I get the guns back and then I've got a firmware that's like tuned for my guns that I'm seeing. But in theory, you know, all of these different guns should behave pretty similarly. So like if it's, you know, one stalker gun or one MPH gun or a Decatur or a custom or whatever, it should be able to detect all of these, right? But either way, just for the sake of like getting this stuff nailed down, I'm open to sending them different radar guns. I'm actually going to be sending it while I'm at SEMA next week. So what I'm waiting for the time being is I'm waiting for all the Detector Genesis Select guns to arrive here, and then weather permitting, I'm hopeful to get my own testing done here this week. And then after I finish my testing, get everything boxed up and sent over to Escort so that while I'm at SEMA, they can do their own testing and analysis and whatnot to really get a better idea as far as what's going on. And then after SEMA, they'll return everything back here to me. And so that's kind of the plan moving forward. So I'm hopeful that they get all this stuff addressed, but like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of tired of seeing like all the issues that we've been seeing here with these detectors, especially considering the price point, you know? They've been working on some of the stuff like fixing the Bluetooth features and the Wi-Fi, and the app is still not great. The CarPlay stuff is a separate issue. I don't actually find the CarPlay features that useful and help in practice, but I guess it's nice that they're adding it. But fundamentally, when it comes to like a radar detector, it needs to detect radar well, you know? No audio delays with like, you see the signal, but you're going to wait a couple seconds to hear the alerts. Like, how is that helpful if the detector is going to be kind of out of sight and you're mostly listening to the alerts, you know? Or like response time. If you're advertising lightning fast performance, just deliver what you actually advertise. I don't think that's too unreasonable to ask. But at this point, like, you know, the more we test and as new firmware updates come out, at this point, I'm just like, nah, this is not where it should be. Now, I know this is obviously going to be concerning to people who are like, hey, I've got one of these detectors, or even you're like, Vortex, why are you recommending these detectors? You know, and I bought one based on your recommendation, but now you're no longer recommending it. Man, this stinks. And I completely understand, you know? And that's kind of one of those things where like, my recommendations are always subject to change. As detectors are updated, things are changed as we get more test data, etc. So like, new update comes out, and if it breaks a lot of stuff, I don't think it would be fair for me to continue recommending them based on their current level of performance. If this stuff is all fixed and like really fixed, we don't see all this stuff cropping up over time, the performance is on point, the false alert filtering is where it should be, there's no weird bugs with ramp ups and arrows and audio alerts, just like it works well, then yes, I would totally be open to putting it back on the list. And there's a lot of stuff about the Escorts in particular that I like. I like the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi when it works properly. You know, the cloud stuff is not a game changer, but it is helpful. I like the speed limit on the display on the face of the detector. You know, I like the fact that the blind spot filtering and the auto lockouts, I mean, even though they have their own share of issues with Escort's implementation, I like the fact that it's kind of more of like a set it and forget it detector, which is going to be easier than something like a Valentine, which doesn't have GPS built in, or a Uniden, which has been having issues with the auto lockouts or their firmware updates and whatnot. So like, there's no manufacturer that's perfect, but I think that there has to be a minimum level of acceptability, which I no longer feel Escort is achieving based on its current level of features and performance. And so for the time being, no, I don't feel comfortable recommending it. Now, this also kind of puts me in a weird position because now on my website, most of the recommendations are going to be for Uniden. I'm removing the Escort ones for the time being. There's also the V1 Gen 2, which I like. I think that's a solid detector, particularly for enthusiasts. But I mean, most of the recommendations now are like Uniden R9, R8, R7 with Mytherus custom firmware, R4, R3, DFR7, like at different price points. No, the Unidens, by no means, they're not perfect either, but I think they're kind of some of the best that are available at some of these price points. There are other detectors that I'm much more mixed on, like the Redenso DS1, I think could be an honorable mention. The Cobra Rad 700i, that could be a potential contender as well for like the under $300 price point. So like there's other detectors that I'm still kind of going back and forth on, but I still tend to prefer the Unidens, even though if you take a look at my website, it looks like now I'm a Uniden shill or I'm biased or being paid off by Uniden, which is not true. But like most of the recommendations now are going to be for Uniden just because they make so many different detectors at different price points that I think are better overall. They do still have their issues. Their auto lockouts, I know they're working on with some of the newer firmwares. It seems like they're improving it, but that still has to be tested and validated. They just released a new firmware for the Uniden R8, which had some issues, particularly throwing some GPS errors. So 1.34 has actually since been pulled from Uniden's website, which I actually like to see. Like if there's serious bugs here, I like when manufacturers take it down and maybe give us older firmware to run for the time being while they work on fixing those bugs, you know? That's not available with Escorts. Like the newest firmware is still available, and so if you plug in your detector, you're still getting the newest firmware that has all the different bugs, and there's no way to backdate. With Uniden, you can now go back and downgrade to older versions of the firmware. You can grab it off their website or just plug it in. Uniden's also sent me like a beta version of the firmware for the R8 to test, which solves the GPS errors. So like I'm really happy to see that quick turnaround here with this update. I think it's a pretty minor fix, which is one of the reasons why they're able to get it out soon, but we'll have to see kind of how that changes, how it works, and when that ultimately gets released. I know the firmware updates for Uniden has continued to be a weak point for their detectors. With the latest version of macOS 15, for example, the update software no longer works properly. I have been sent a beta version of the update software, which restores firmware update compatibility on the latest versions of macOS, which is really nice to see. But again, that hasn't been released to the public yet either. There's also rumors of the new Uniden detectors, the R4W and the R8W, which should be adding Wi-Fi capabilities, so maybe giving us over-the-air updates, a lot like we have with the Escort detector. detectors. SEMA's coming up next week, and it looks like they're going to be officially announcing the detectors there and revealing some info about it. And so I'm like, okay, let's kind of see how that would change things. Okay, would that be replacing the R8 and R4, or are they just going to be like, you know, a higher tier version? I don't know. I don't know pricing. I don't know performance. Is it going to have bugs? Is it going to be implemented well? I don't know any of that kind of stuff, but like I'm kind of keeping an eye out as far as like what's coming on the pipeline for, are there going to be any new Escort detectors? Is Escort going to fix their current lineup? Are there going to be more fixes and updates for the Unidens? Are we going to see more stuff with the Valentine? And Mike Valentine unfortunately passed away earlier this year, and so what does that mean for the future of the company and continued updates? There's other engineers, of course, that are there as well, but like that's a question mark. So as we get into the end of the year, I'm taking a look at like, you know, the best radar detectors, and I want to do an updated guide. And I'm definitely taking a look at that kind of stuff, you know, like, okay, the V1 has changed over time. Uniden's going to be potentially releasing some new stuff. They're working on firmware updates. Escort, their current versions are not working very well, but hopefully they can fix it. I don't know if there's going to be new detectors released there as well. So like things are definitely changing here, and I'm keeping an eye on that as we get into the end of the year and I do my updated like best radar detector recommendations. And so for the time being, based on like right now as you guys are watching this video, I don't feel comfortable based on the current firmware running the Escorts, but I'm hopeful, of course, for many different reasons, particularly for you guys who are running these detectors, that Escort gets these updates addressed and like just nail this stuff. Like these detectors, they've been out for years now. These are not beta detectors at this point. Like the stuff I would like to see refined and working well, you know? They've been out for years. Like at this point, I think it's fair to ask that like the stuff should be solid, especially for your high-end flagships. Escort's been making detectors for a long time, and like I expect more, you know? No detector is perfect. I don't think any manufacturer has released anything that I'm like completely satisfied with. This is true for radar detectors, it's true for dash cams, it's true for laser jammers. There's nothing that I find to be like as good as what I would ultimately like to see across the board, but I still have like my minimum standards of acceptability, which I feel like Escort has dropped below with their current versions of the Redline 360c firmware, and it looks like it's starting to roll out for some of their other detectors as well, Max 360c Mark II, Max 360 Mark II, etc. So we're just going to have to see like how this stuff continues to evolve over time. And so for the time being, I wanted to share kind of an update as far as my thought process on what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking, what I would look for in the future, and why my recommendations are changing for the time being, and how perhaps they might change in the future as well. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you like for continued updates as this stuff continues to evolve over time, but this is how things stand now. Thanks for watching. Again, SEMA's coming up next week, so I'll be there in Las Vegas giving you guys updates for like all the new stuff that's going to be released, talking with a lot of the manufacturers like we do every year. So that should be good, interesting, potentially awkward with Escort. I don't know, but like here's how things are going either way. Thanks guys. See you in the next one. Bye.